Good morning, everyone. Good morning. As part of our 50th anniversary celebration, we wanted to create space not just to remember our history, but to hear it directly from people who helped live it. Today, we're honored to welcome two people whose lives are deeply woven into the story of metropolitan community churches and MCC Portland's earliest years. Andrew Dixon was closely connected to our founding pastor, serving as his roommate, confidant, chauffeur, and unofficial district chauffeur for the Northwest District of MCC. He also became the first lay pastor of River of Life MCC in Tri-Cities, Washington. And Jane Sandmeyer was the spouse of our first assistant pastor, who was also our first female pastor, and Jane later served as executive director of UFMCC's Excel program. Her spouse, the assistant pastor, was Arlene Ackerman. Arlene Ackerman. I forgot to write that on here. She also served 2 terms on the board of directors and lived here in Portland from 1978 to 1987. We're deeply grateful that they are here with us today, along with our other pioneers who are here in the room and watching online. So rather than hearing a lecture or a sermon about our history, we're going to spend some time listening to stories, memories, and reflections from those who were here in the early days. And thank you for Chuck for helping set this up. So, first for both of you, how did each of you first find MCC Portland and what drew you in?
Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think you were here first at the church.
Well, I visited.
Might have to be
Yeah, real close.
I visited once or twice in 1977 before I actually became a member in November of 1978.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Good. The first thing I want to say is that I think, speaking with Jane, not for Jane, but it is an honor to be with you. One of the first things that I became aware of last night at the banquet was that you all still love to have a good time.
Yes.
And the demographics may have changed. Some of us may have gotten older. As your founding pastor used to say, if you can't have a good time in church, why go?
I found MCC in California, the town of Stockton, when Arlene and I were very young. And I'm at the grocery store and I see Troy Perry's book, The Lord is My Shepherd and He Knows I'm Gay. And my cousin was the checkout clerk and I was not out. So I bought like 3 books to pad that one, rushed home, called Arlene. We stayed up all night reading this. We were just on fire. But we were in a little town called Lodi, which was not a place to come out. And a little bit of time goes by, a couple of months, and at the same grocery store, and there is the book Lesbian Woman by Del Martin and Phyllis Lyons. And I did the same thing, padded it with several other books, God knows what they were, Vitamin C and the Comical, and rushed home, called Arlene. We stayed up all night reading it, and now we're doubly on fire. What do we do? What do we do? And all at once, a sign goes up outside of a little storefront in Stockton, Metropolitan Community Church. And we were, oh my God, because across the street from that is my Father G's car lot. And of course I wasn't. Especially to my father. So we couldn't sit in our skins anymore. It was like hot pepper oil. We just had to do something. We had to come out. We had to find this church. She was from the UCC conservative background, I was from a Catholic background. So we called the church, and Candace Nesbitt and Alice, I don't remember her last name, were co-pastors. They were a couple. We met them in a dark bar on the wrong side of town and talked about, well, we could never go. We could never go. At the end of the conversation, we thought, well, come out to somebody. And we started calling everybody. Nobody answered the phone. God had other plans. So we drove to MCC and never left. That little church in Stockton, within a couple of months, we had a Holy Union. 200 people came that we'd never seen before because they had to see this weird concept of a marriage between gay people in a church. It was
Wow.
huge to the town of Stockton, huge. And within a few minutes, she decided it was time to go into ministry in MCC through Frida Smith in Sacramento, Reverend Elder Frida Smith. And then within a year, the Portland church called her, and I had to give up my career. We had to sell our house. We had, to move. It was a huge commitment. And we got here. The church was wonderful to us, absolutely wonderful to us. I'd never been a pastor's spouse before. I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know what was going on. We came from a Catholic background, but MCC was so familiar to me from the minute we walked in the door. The hymns were not familiar, but they were welcoming. Communion was familiar. But just the nature of the people, I knew I was home. Community was everything. It was wonderful. But in 1978, when that happened, we didn't yet have AIDS. So the community really was going to be even more important in just a few short years. Arlene left, changed her relationship, went elsewhere, and I stayed. And as it was noted, I stayed on the board of directors. But very quickly, we got involved in a program that originally came from the Catholic Curcio movement called Excel. It was a wonderful weekend retreat. I don't know if any of you have been on it. I know the old timers have. Yeah. And it became an international renewal of faith or exploration of faith for people who had not been churched. Right? And it was a lay-led program with one clergy on the weekend as advisor, but it was a team of volunteers, laity, who trained to put them on. So we had a whole team here in the Portland church as well. But I helped give Excels in Australia, Mexico, all over the United States, Canada, and England. And it was phenomenal because it empowered laity to both explore and lead. So that was kind of my involvement. But primarily this church, at the wonderful physical church that we had on Broadway, was so important in my life. And all the 9 years that I spent here were really wonderful.
I think that's the way you describe first coming into MCC and knowing you're at home is the way I think almost probably everybody I've talked to walked in and knew we were at home, even if we didn't know what that exactly was going to look like. Also, the Excel program is interesting because this is where our church has come over the last year and a half, as we know, with laity-led. So,
I first heard I didn't hear of MCC, but I heard about a church in Portland that had a ministry to the gay community. And I heard that from the pianist at Tri-Cities Christian Center, where I had been going to church in Pasco. And I ran into him at a gay bar in Spokane. I had come from a Presbyterian UCC charismatic background, which blended well with Austin's. And this Christian center that I was involved in was being run by 3 individuals who were all wife swapping. And I thought, how can you be doing that and condemn people like me you don't even know? So I decided, I've had enough of this. And I had been accepted at Cal State University in Northridge, California. And I was in the process of moving there. When I thought I'm going to check out this gay church thing in Portland. And I think the second Sunday I was in attendance was the Sunday that the roof split open right in front of the communion table. And it had been raining really hard. And there was a waterfall came down right in front of the communion table. I will never forget that.
There was a sitting there when we met there.
The trials of old buildings.
Anyway, I thought, well, this church is entertaining to say the least.
So what was church actually like in those earlier years? I think a lot of us, what was worship? What emotions did it feel like? It was more Pentecostal, Baptist, charismatic, a combination. I know we got people that have come from everything from Mormon to Southern Baptist and everything in between.
I always felt that MCC was a good combination of everything. When you're trying to run a charismatic Christian center, for example, it's the same situation. You've got people coming in to your midst with every different type of background. And you're never going to be able to please everybody, but you can please most of the people most of the time. And I don't think we ever had any complaints about something being left out, or too short, or too long, or too this or too that. It was wonderful. And I have to say at this point that, coming from Kennewick, Washington, I never felt any fear walking into MCC Portland at all. Never once. I have to tell you the story of my cousin Ann, who lives in Alaska. And her side of my family is Swedish. And she took a trip over to Stockholm, Sweden, because she's a children's book author. And she was over there on some kind of a seminar or something like that. And she said, I felt like this is my home. This is where I belong. And I always felt that way about MCC Portland. I still do. Beautiful, beautiful.
When Austin would get up to the piano and start pounding on that piano and singing, there was no one unmoved in the congregation. You sang along, you jumped up, you joined in, and it was electric. It was wonderful, and there are a lot of old timers here who can tell you about that. As I said, the music as a Catholic wasn't terribly familiar, but the liturgy was, and the order of it, and the respect of it. And what I missed, having left the Catholic Church, was kind of that sense of awe and that sense of, I'm not finding the right word, but reverence. That's the word. And I always found that in MCC, even at its most Pentecostal, there was a reverence. And I keep bringing that back to it brought in the community. Everybody was respected, everybody was accepted, and from my background, I wanted an all-inclusive place to be. I wanted not to be in a there's only one way. I wanted it to be accepted that there were multiple ways to reach the divinity.
I had been praying for a body of like-minded believers. Yes, those were my words. Yes. And God answered my prayer.
So I think we've actually kind of talked about the next one, which is how did the church balance safety with the need to let people know there was a place for them? Like you said, there was hadn't come out yet, especially to parents and coming to church and everything. I know even for some of us, were there any like precautions the church took to protect people, or?
I'm not the one to answer that. You want to talk about?
Well, in Portland, I think we had protesters maybe a handful of times. And people from the board and deacons would go out and confront them, and we'd be singing about Jesus loves me. They would get frustrated and leave. There were a few times when we called police, and they came when the protesters got a little aggressive. But I think my take was that I would hear often from newcomers, well, this is the third time I've come that I actually walked in the door. They would, circle the block, and it'd take them a while to get up enough courage to, find a parking spot, and then, come through the doors. But we never had any really violent physical confrontation. I think it was more psychological of, going up those steps and walking through that door. But once you got in that door, you felt, I'm at home.
Right. Wow. I actually remember one of those times when the protesters were out, and it just amazed me how there were people that guided people, protected the parishioners, and guided us past the protesters into the sanctuary, and we had church, and then we sang, like you said, Jesus loves me afterwards. So one of the things we hear over and over in MCC history is that many people arrive carrying deep wounds from other churches. How did this congregation help people heal spiritually after being hurt by church? We know that communion's one of the ways. I know for a lot of us, it really, being able to get communion every day and being able to get that blessing is the essential part of MCC. Was there any other ways that the church helped people feel loved by God and healed from some of that trauma?
At MCC, we take communion very, very seriously. And the reason that we do that, I believe, is because we were often denied or prevented from taking communion. In some of the places we came from, it just wasn't allowed. And so, yeah, maybe we do go a little overboard with candles and, all the holy hardware, as Austin used to call it. If you think that's funny, just stay tuned. But when people are denied a certain thing that they know they have a right to, they're going to put heavy value on that. And I don't see a lot of the things that I used to see at MCC Portland on the community table up here. That's okay, because, like I mentioned, as a demographic, you're changing, and that's okay. This is what you need. My partner's young sister and her husband were prevented from taking communion for 6 months because they had premarital sex before they got married. They've been married a long time now. And I thought it was a requirement. We're not talking about a charismatic church, we're talking about a normal church. So I'm sure that some of you probably have similar experiences maybe with the Catholic Church.
My mother was refused communion at the communion altar when she divorced my dad. Now that was 1969, but they literally, when she went up, they passed her by. That was my last day at the Catholic Church. Don't mess with Mom.
Right.
But a lot of people caved under problems like that and felt that means God doesn't love me. And my reaction was always, that means the church doesn't love you, but that has nothing to do with God.
Yeah, you're here.
And MCC, when I first found it in Stockton and went to Sacramento and heard Frida Smith preach, and then I went to San Francisco and heard different people there preach, one of the ministers there had the same last name as I did, and it was like, yay, there's another gay Sandmeyer in the world. We discovered we weren't related, but how can you not be? It's so close. It's so much fun. But the acceptance and the community, again, the groundswell here in Portland was phenomenal, and Austin, to start with, was terrific at getting the whole community involved.
So one of the things that made MCC different from many churches at the time, and still now, is the willingness to open doors that other churches kept closed. So how accepting was the early church of women in leadership, and what was it like? I'm sure you can answer this with your wife as a pastor. What was it like when women began serving in pastoral roles?
Well, I'd say that for the most part, it was accepted a little bit in the way of patronizing, like, you're there, honey, there was a huge amount of acceptance, a little bit of patronizing, a little bit of uncertainty. I know that one particular man didn't feel like women were actually gay. So gay men, this was a church for gay men, and he had to work through that. But, I'm sure that Robin and Betty and others here can tell you, Frodo, about the integration. It took some time. I know that the biggest challenge was when we brought Reverend Dolores Berry in, because as a big black woman with a very charismatic and singing ministry, some men were like, yikes. Can I back up 3 steps? I don't know this person. But again, that's what MCC is about. We're confronting all of our issues. We are not separate from our greater community. We bring our community with us. We bring our history with us. We all come from someplace that is either wounded or different. My hometown did not allow blacks in it. Had a covenant against blacks moving into town. It was German, Japanese, and Italian. Can you say the Axis powers? We're old enough to remember World War II history. That was the community I was raised with. That was their vision. And they were a little confused how to blend into the real world, It was quite challenging. So I was quite anxious to get out of there because I always felt different. And I didn't know I was gay until I met up with my lover, Arlene. But MCC Portland was always very willing to confront its issues and work through the challenges. Not everybody. Some people left because they weren't ready to deal with the issues. But we had wonderful district conferences, and all the churches planted in Oregon and Washington and Alaska and Northern California would come together twice a year for district conference. So we continued to grow our community, and love and the acceptance of God was more important than, I think, any of our individual issues. So that's what made the churches continue to grow. We needed to come together, and there were just a few straight people always involved here that made us realize, okay, we're not separate from, we're blended into, but we can come together, it's okay, and learn to accept ourselves And that's the main issue I think that MCC has always been there for, is teaching us to love ourselves and accept ourselves as gay people, as Christians, as human beings.
Wow. Yeah, so every organization is shaped not just by events, but by people, of course. So tell us about some of the personalities and leaders from those early days. Especially want to know about Pastor Austin, since you were his roommate, chauffeur, took him all over the Northwest. So tell us about him behind the scenes.
Buckle your seatbelts. Well, the first thing I want to say is that I was never on the board of directors at MCC Portland, or the social committee, or the pastoral search committee, or anything like that. I was a regular tithing member, and I participated in the district conferences and the spiritual retreats that we had. But my calling, as apparently it could be regarded, was different. And I hadn't been living in Portland very long before I realized that your founding pastor was looking for a roommate, and I was too. And so I talked to him one Sunday evening after church, and we got together and hit it right off. Now, I have to tell you a little bit about your founding pastor to begin with. He was an extremely loving, generous, kind, charismatic, intelligent, funny, and he could be very self-deprecating. He was also a large man in heart and in wisdom. And when people would ask him how much he weighed, he would respond, 300 and plenty. I liked it. He was from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He always regarded Tulsa, Oklahoma as having a lot of class. And he regarded Oklahoma City as high-class bar trash. There you go. He was an ordained Assembly of God pastor in Oklahoma, and Assembly of God churches ordained their own pastors. And that is the background he came from. He preached in a black business suit. He did not preach in a Geneva preaching robe, like from his background. And one day I asked him, I said, well, you have to remember, there's this little charismatic kid in, how old was I? Late 20s or early 30s? From Kennewick, Washington, living in the big city. And I said, well, how can we never wear that white preaching robe? I think they call it an alba. ALB. He said, because I don't want to look like the Matterhorn moving down the aisle. And there was actually an occasion, I believe, where's Betty? That Betty remembers when Austin was doing communion with his black Geneva preaching robe and all the candles and all the holy hardware and the hoopla around the communion table. He actually set himself on fire. So we did have good times back in those days. But at home, Austin was just as much fun. We had a Proctor Silex automatic coffee maker, which was really uptown back in those days. And Austin and I both loved our coffee. And I came out a couple mornings, and the thing hadn't worked right. It hadn't perked the coffee. Instead, it had just drained all the water all over the countertop and all over the floor. And I finally said, Austin, we've got to get a new coffee maker. This one just doesn't work right. And without batting an eye, he says, well, you know, I always regarded Proctor Silex as a glove for colonoscopy. Now, in a lot of the things that I'm going to tell you, there's an extreme difference between naughty or nasty and funny. And Austin always was on the funny side. There was a time up in Bellevue, Washington. Austin moved to Bellevue from Eugene, and I was up there visiting him, and Austin loved to do what he called making money at the cash machine. When he was living in Portland here, he had an account with First Far West Federal, I think it was called, and Austin called it First Far Out Federal. And they irritated him because they would always put a 10-day hold on his checks from the fellowship. And so I persuaded him to open an account with Seattle First National Bank. And we were at the Overlake branch cash machine in Bellevue, and Austin's PIN code was always the same: Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And Austin was inside the branch trying to convince them to release a 10-day hold on his check, because he wasn't very happy that now that I had persuaded him to open an account with Seattle First National, they were doing the same thing. And I had no sooner punched in Ghost, and the cash machine fell out on the floor inside the bank. And I ran inside the branch and I said, Austin, I said, we've got to get out of here fast. And he said, how is that? And I said, because I punched in your code and the cash machine just fell out on the floor. And he said, well, how does that affect me? And I said, because it was your card in the machine. And we both ran out of the branch. If you could have ever seen Austin run, you would not have wanted to be in his way. But some of the funniest stories had to do with just being his chauffeur and driving him around the district. I got to know a lot of people everywhere, and in particular Vancouver County, and it was an experience that I wouldn't have ever wanted to miss. When Austin retired from Colonial Penn Insurance Company, he took some of his retirement savings and he bought a Mercedes diesel. Does anybody remember that car? Yeah. And it was a contraption at best. And Austin called the car Snowflake. And we had other colorful names for it that were not Snowflake. And the car, the only way that you're going to understand this is if I describe it. When you would start this car, okay, and put it in reverse, the back end of the car would rear up in the air. And it was the strangest thing. And I said to Austin, there's something wrong with this car. I worked for a bunch of West German engineers, either Dr. Siltronic or Wacker, as you may know it, here in Portland. And I said, they'd be glad to take a look at it for you. And he says to me, oh, he said, it's just like a albino cat in heat. And this car had a, it was strange. It had a, to start the car, you would put the key in the ignition and turn it on. And then there was this big black knob on the dashboard that you had to pull out and hold it for about 35, 45 seconds. And then pull it the rest of the way, and the engine would start. And Austin would, he would, instead of just, you had to have really strong hands like a lumberjack to pull this knob out. It was a German car, it's just built like, you know, like the Bismarck. And you had to pull this knob out. Instead of Austin grabbing the knob like that, he would go like this. But I looked at him one day and I said, Austin, what are you doing? And he said, I'm choking it so it'll fire off. And I said, no, you're not. You're playing with that big black knob. He says, well, Snowflake likes it that way. Those are just some of the funny memories I had of living with him. I'm sure that you all have your own too.
For the next part, on the back table, then 2006, right about the time I came here, there was a book released, A Curious and Peculiar People, that has a lot of the history of this church in it. That's where I go when I want to hear about what happened and you'll see a little bit later, there's some pictures of Betty and Andrew and Jane and Pastor Austin that will be up on the screen for the song right after this. But one thing for background, for those who don't know, Pastor Austin was recruited he was pastoring in Sacramento, right? And he was recruited to come up here and start MCC Portland, which started out as what was it called? A study. And when they reached 50 members, they became a mission. And then when they reached 60 members, they could become a congregation. Betty was actually on that application to become a mission. I know that, but yeah, very interesting. Do you have anybody that sticks out to you, unsung hero, someone that made you laugh?
Yeah, I have some questions. Jane, you talked about the era before AIDS. Talk about how MCC responded to AIDS, and if you would, talk about some of the saints we lost.
So the question is about AIDS and the saints, and many of you here will know more of that than I did, because since I left in '87, it was just getting to become an epidemic. From Central California, where I went to live and work, I was back here for funerals a lot. And then when I moved to LA, I was back to Northern California and occasionally up here for funerals. So the wave hit I was near San Francisco. So I was experiencing it down there in the churches more. But Betty had a list of 56 people out of 200
That I know of.
that she knows of who died in that period of time.
Out of a congregation of 200, fully a quarter of our congregation.
Wow.
So MCC Portland lost a quarter of its congregation in that period of time. Now, that's when we started the AIDS candle at every service, and we would have the regular annual prayers and name people that we knew who died of AIDS. But some of the individual wonderful people, and we could take a minute and call out names, were people like Reverend Ron Bergeron, who grew up here and became licensed and went to Ottawa, Canada, Ron Raz, Amani Jabari,
Jose Montoya.
Jose Montoya. Go ahead.
Jimmy Bryant.
Jimmy Bryant. Many wonderful members and leaders in this congregation were gone too soon. Some experienced hospice and many experienced without the diaconate of this church and the yes, that
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt, but I have a little information about the AIDS efforts here. During the height of the epidemic, because there was no one else willing to take care of our people, doctors, nurses, what have you, nobody, they wouldn't touch them. Their families often wouldn't let them come home because they didn't want to eat off the same plates, even though you obviously watched them. We developed an AIDS care team, and then we obtained a grant to sustain it, which provided for things not yet being provided by the community at large, including like going in and cleaning their houses, doing their yard work, sitting with someone who could not be left alone, transportation, meals, walking their pets. I mean, things that anybody could do that didn't take a lot of medical skill. Then for those who wanted help, we would talk with Pat Schweibert, the angel to our community. We would help them move to the Peace House for Pat's loving care during their final days. Since those days, there have been times when someone needed help, perhaps coming home from the hospital, not able to stay by themselves, but their partner had to go to work anyway. Then we would come to the Congregation for Volunteers to do those same things. So we expanded it once we moved through the AIDS epidemic. And, I've often wondered how we dealt with our grief. Obviously, some of us haven't. But we moved forward and began doing for each other the things that we had done for our sick friends when that was no longer an everyday need. And out of that eventually came the Congregational Life Team. There were a number of steps also in that process, but the community stepped forward. We took care of our people gradually as other services actually began to become available. Then we turned our efforts into reaching out to the rest of the community at large, using the skills that we had learned in taking care of our brothers and sisters with AIDS. So.
Thanks, man.
What can you tell us about the feeding the 5,000?
I can't tell you a single thing.
Robin, do you remember the history of feeding the 5,000?
Not at all.
Yeah, so the first original effort, I've been doing some Bible study with Joyce, what's Joyce's last name?
Baxter.
Baxter, and Johnny Sun Eagle, and I were doing these Bible studies in Revelation. Oh my gosh. And we just felt like, okay, this is all very well, but this is all theoretical. This is all theology. We want to do some hands-on actually doing something. And we decided what we could do is feed people. So Johnny was in charge of going and getting donations of food from all these stores, surplus food, and Joyce was in charge of getting the cooking crew together, and I was in charge of the cleanup crew. And we were all ready to launch, and we told Pastor Jim Glyer, who was our pastor at the time, we said, we want to announce the Feed the 5,000 meal. He says, oh, no, you can't announce that during the service. So then he's in the middle of the sermon, and he realizes that the scripture is about me. So he made the announcement, and it went on from then, and other people took over, it continued to be a place where people who maybe had no connection to MCC or even the gay community, but, you know, they found a place where they could feel welcomed to have a meal in community.
If I might, Frodo, just to carry on with that, at some point, the county health inspector people decided that our kitchen didn't meet code, and so we couldn't continue the feeding the 5,000, but it morphed into then the food ferries, where we boxed food and, you know, basically became an outlet for free food for people who needed it. And this was not only our gay community, but any of our extended community members at large who needed food. And then that eventually, when we sold the building a few years ago, kind of set that loose to develop on its own, and that's now the project Hand Up project that's located at Q Center, and they literally move somewhere between 5 and 8 tons of food a month.
Wow. Really, tons
Yep.
of food a month.
Q Center on North Mississippi.
I also know Esther's Pantry also came out of that.
That's
and
right.
Serving and it's still, I think it's out of the Vancouver church. No,
They have another one.
Martha's Pantry.
Yeah. Same thing, only from a different church. Yeah.
Yeah.
Came out of the AIDS epidemic.
Providence, Milwaukee.
Yeah, and the clothes closet also.
Yeah, and a closed closet. So, yeah,
This
yeah,
little church got very active.
yeah. So as we celebrate 50 years, it's important to not only look backward, but also forward. So first, looking back still, what are you most proud of? Either you or something the church started during your time that had an impact.
Well, Betty, didn't you say that they bought the building and paid for it there on 2400 in 1 year?
I don't, we bought it within a year of the founding, which is kind of unheard of. But we actually paid for it a few times over the years. And then would take a loan out because it was an old building, needed repairs, or we had a special project we needed to fund, and then we pay that off. And so I don't know, we had 2 or 3 mortgage burnings, the celebrations over the years.
And didn't for the roof you sell piano keys?
Some piano keys to buy the piano.
Oh, to buy the piano,
to
buy
buy
the roof.
Yeah,
Okay.
Wow. So piano keys to buy the piano
yeah.
for those online.
There were a number of very creative fundraising efforts
Yes.
over the years. And the building was phenomenal when it had its 100th anniversary of being the cornerstone laid by an American president, President Taft. That particular celebration, I think Reverend Elder Nancy Wilson came up. Reverend Elder Troy Perry, the founder, had been here many times. But the Portland Church, having that building, standing on that corner through all trials and tribulations, I think was a beacon of hope in this community and a solidity. We needed this, we needed that solidity. It's changed now. But going forward, there's so many options, so much possibility. But the church needs to grow. We need to find the youth that we were 50 years ago, because we were in our 20s and 30s, and some middle-aged and older. We need to become more relevant again to the current youth, and they're a different animal. Living online, living on their phones. We didn't have phones, so we were willing to talk to people at that time, and that was everything to me, was literally being in community. And when I look at my nieces and nephews, since I chose not to have kids, and they're 30 to 50 years old, those babies, none of them are churched. None of them are in community. They don't know their next door neighbors. So the world in general is kind of at a place where people don't know even how to have relationships, not to mention lovers. I have a nephew in LA who's in a relationship with a woman in New York State, and they FaceTime. So it's a different world. So getting involved in church and the relevance of a positive spiritual experience is what I think MCC faces today. In Southern California, 4 of the churches I attended have closed, MCCs. So there's 2 left, San Diego and LA, maybe Long Beach, I'm not sure if that's still existing. Used to be about 20 churches across the greater Southern California area. In Northern California, north of San Francisco, there used to be 3 and now there's 1. I mean, that's majorly AIDS. And also because I've been working for nonprofits for 30 years, 40 years, we never learned how to create a giving program to get people to put us in their wills. We never figured that out. Had we done so, a lot of MCCers, even in Portland, gave their money to the Episcopals when they died in their will, because that's who they remembered.
Yeah.
But we never set that up here. But Portland, way back when we had our lawyer, Mary Klepser, who was one of the first 12, she did a weekend on wills, etc., but none of it was about giving to the church. We've always been sort of sticky about that. We need to get over that. We need to get over that. And talk about long-term and not just giving on Sunday when you happen to be here. We need to talk about that for the future. I think that's what MCC's got to do.
Good word.
Jody?
You may find it interesting to know that the reason MCC Portland, a very tiny congregation, has a very big bank account is because we got a $500,000 request from an MCC member that none of us even knew the name.
Well, I did.
The pioneers.
So somebody at some
Yeah,
point
those online, part of the
discussed
reason
requests.
we got a $500,000 bequest from a longtime MCC member.
And he was the partner of the man who took his checkbook out at a board meeting when it finally dawned on him that the reason we had no disabled people in our congregation was that they couldn't get to the
They couldn't get in, yeah.
to the sanctuary. And once that clicked, he wrote a check.
Roger wrote the check to build the wheelchair elevator.
The first elevator, we put a second one in later, but the first one was because of a board meeting when he finally got it, that the reason no disabled people were attending was because they couldn't get to the sanctuary.
I had to climb those stairs.
There were a lot of stairs in that building, yes. So, closing question, unless anybody has any after, but what do you hope the younger generations, I mean, we're not young, but we still got time, but younger generations of MC Portland and anybody who comes in after us will carry forward into the next 50 years?
A few minutes ago, you asked if there was anything that we were particularly proud of.
Yeah.
I guess, you know, on a rather self-centered note, I think something that I'm proud of is perhaps keeping your founding pastor from killing himself behind the wheel of a car. He had a very scary reputation of falling asleep behind the wheel.
Oh.
And he fell asleep in the Central Valley in Northern California when he was driving a big Buick Centurion. and went off the road and took out a quarter of a mile of fence posts. And when I moved in with him, he was even older later than that. And I thought, this just can't be. And I thought, I like to travel and I love to drive. So that's how I became a district chauffeur. Yeah. Well, if having a Buick Centurion coming at you is scary, imagine Austin in a 5,000-pound Mercedes.
So the question is, how do we
Yeah, or what do you hope we carry forward into the next 50 years?
I think, just like all Americans, we have to be careful not to lose our history. Not to forget. I know that, I know a couple of young women who just got married, they're in their early 30s. They've never heard of Troy Perry, they didn't know what he did to help get marriage going. They'd never heard of Del Lyon and Phyllis Martin, they didn't know what they had done to help legal marriage happen. And in general, when the Supreme Court just recently declined to challenge gay marriage, hallelujah, it kind of went over the heads of most gay people of a younger age. They assume that what they've got, they've always had. They don't know what people who are alive today went through in the 40s and 50s and 60s to get them what they've got. So we need to not be afraid to say, hey, that wasn't legal. When women are saying, hey, until 1978, we couldn't have a credit card in our own name without our husband's name on it. We couldn't buy a house without our husband's approval. Now, Arlene and I bought our first house in 1971 because her brother-in-law signed permission with the bank to give us money. Had to be a man. She didn't want her father, I didn't want my father, so her brother-in-law convinced them to give us money to buy a house. In California. So it's in our lifetime that we have not had freedoms as women, we have not had freedoms as gay people. When we had our district conference in Boise, there were still men in prison from the boys of Boise. They were still in prison for being gay.
From the 1950s.
From the 1950s to the late 80s. Okay, so we really need to be able to find a way to communicate our history and say, don't take your acceptance from the greater community for granted. Be grateful, but don't take it for granted.
Amen. I think one of the questions I don't know that we covered was unsung heroes, was it?
Yeah.
And when I was involved with MCC, there was a gentleman who was a counselor like Betty, and his name was Del Thornton. Oh yes. Oh, you know him.
Yeah.
And he had a particular outreach to kids coming from the Old Church. And they could be really screwed up. Really not knowing how to go on. They had a spiritual background, and they had a theological background, and they had a lifestyle that they weren't able to pursue. And some of them were so messed up that they were afraid if they darkened the doors of MCC Portland, who knows what. And some of them jumped off the Fremont Bridge. Now, I don't know if you can, I don't know if you call the bridges by the names anymore.
Definitely.
That Fremont Bridge is a big one. And you jumped off of it. It was all over. And I think Dale Jordan has to be one of Harlan's heroes. He really does. I hope he's still around because one of the things that I wanted to say was, in response to your question, that we're still discriminated against. We're still ostracized. We're still demonized.
Use the mic.
We're still ostracized. We're still demonized. We're still despised. We're still prevented from communion. We're still guilt-tripped. We're still run off of job sites. There are those who still jump off Fremont bridges, wherever those bridges may be. They're still being fired from their employment. Now they get around it legally. They just figure out a way, right? Yes, we can marry, and we have some good rights, but we have to prove them frequently. And things are better than they were in our days, but they're still not the best. And I wanted to read this to you in my closing remarks. This was a speech.
Microphone.
This was a speech that was given on October 29th in 1941 at the Harrow Boys School outside of London, England. And it wasn't really what you call a commencement address. It was just like a graduation from high school type address. And it goes, never give in, never, never, never. In nothing, great or small, large or petty. Never give in, except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. Anyway, that was spoken by Winston Churchill. So, you must carry on. And to that end,
Thank you both. Thank you for your courage, your faith, your stories, and for helping build this place and other MCCs where so many people could finally experience both authenticity and belonging, including me. Because of pioneers like you and so many others from those early years, generations of people have been able to walk through these doors and hear something life-changing. You are loved by God exactly as you are. I think that's the message, the takeaway. You are loved by God exactly as you are. So would you all join me in thanking Jane and Andrew?